Welcome to Into Theology. I'm joined by Ian Clary, and we are looking at book 2 of Saint Augustine's Confessions.
Not Saint Augustine?
Well, I'm just whatever. I go back and forth.
We should just refer to him in the Latin, Augustinus, and then we're
Augustinus. Good. There you go. Although then some Latin scholar will come and say we're mispronouncing it.
Totally. It'd be like my friend Megan DeVore or my buddy Caleb Coho or somebody.
Exactly, someone like that. And this book, the beginning portion of the Confessions kind of works through his life almost chronologically, although there are key ideas being talked about. So this is adolescence. It's kind of
and
I think he's 16, right?
He doesn't always follow a strict chronology because I think his dad gets baptized near the end here, but his dad actually got baptized a little earlier and things. But
okay, yeah. So he's probably a teenager at this point.
He's an adolescent. You know, it's interesting is that. This gets into some of the awkward language that he gets using here about his sexual lusts and stuff, because apparently I was reading James O'Donnell's commentary on this, and he was saying that that Augustine, the ordering of his life part of Confessions, actually the stages of like infancy, adolescence, whatever, actually correspond to the 6 days of creation. And so where he is at now, he's actually in the third day of creation, which is water. And so that's why you get all this like eruption language, it's like gross stuff.
Which is fascinating because it is in this chapter too, where his dad recognizes that he's virile, and his dad's like super excited, so he gets drunk and is like, "I'm having grandkids."
Yeah. It's like kind of funny. And
in the baths too, right? Aren't they in the baths?
He's in the Roman baths there in Tagaste.
When, just for context, you're not wearing clothes in the Roman baths,
right? And it's all men and whatever.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is that wasn't weird for his dad to do that. Like that was the type of culture where it was like, oh, you could see your son is, well, look at that. And like that was actually pretty common. So he was just a typical Roman at that point. But so even when we think about the bigger structure of the book, I'm like, why does Augustine go into all this like creation discussion in Genesis 1 at the end? The whole book is ordered according to the 6 days of creation. Amongst there's so many layers, right?
That's actually helpful, because I was kind of, my understanding was in a sense that the first 9 books were sort of his journey to God, and then their last book, it kind of includes the cosmos's journey to God in a sense.
Yeah, that's true.
But actually, in reality, at one level, he is a microcosm because it is tracking those 6 days.
He uses that word, doesn't he? I think, doesn't he use microcosm? I can't remember.
Maybe.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing, it's like this book has so many layers to it. Like
he's a smarty pants is what you're trying to say.
He's very, very smart.
It's possible that this book will stand the test of time and be read for 1,600 years.
It's only been about that long so far, so we've got a few more years to figure out.
We've got a few more years. We're good,
but
it's possible. You never know.
Yeah.
You wanted to read something here at the beginning.
Yeah. So in book 2, I guess section 7 is what I wanted to read. So I'm still in the Pine Coffin edition, although my buddy Caleb over the weekend gave me the new edition of the Loeb Classics, which I'm pretty stoked about. So that's been actually kind of fun. The diglot, so kind of slowly working through the Latin, because my Latin kind of sucks. But anyway, so
on Chadwick, that's page 32, and for Pine's Coffin, it's page what?
51.
Okay. So if someone else, depending on what they're using, that might be helpful too.
Yeah. It's the one that starts with a quote from Psalm 115:12. So I'll start with there, and it's 2 paragraphs. So what return shall I make to the Lord for my ability to recall these things with no fear in my soul? I will love you, Lord, and thank you and praise your name, because you have forgiven me such great sins and such wicked deeds. I acknowledge that it was by your grace and mercy that you melted away my sins like ice. I acknowledge too that by your grace I was preserved from whatever sins I did not commit, for there was no knowing what I might have done, since I loved evil, even if it served no purpose. I avow that you have forgiven me all, both the sins which I committed of my own accord and those which by your guidance I was spared from committing. What man who reflects upon his own weakness can dare to claim that his own efforts have made him chaste and free from sin, as though this entitled him to love you the less, on the ground that he had less need of the mercy by which you forgive the sins of the penitent? There are some who have been called by you, and because they have listened to your voice, they have avoided the sins which I here record and confess for them to read. But let them not deride me for having been cured by the same doctor who preserved them from sickness, or at least from such grave sickness as mine. Let them love you just as much and even more than I do, for they can see that the same healing hand which rid me of the great fever of my sins protects them from falling sick of the same disease. So there's a whole pile of things that are going on in here, right? He's kind of like setting in relief a little bit, like what God has done for him. So here you got all these stories of, stealing the pears, his lust, and that sort of stuff, things that are just making him absolutely sick. And he's talking about how God's cared for him even in the midst of all that. The idea here is that that's to cause us to praise God, to love him, to thank him because of the healing that he has given to us. And then he's also in this section telling us part of his purpose for writing the book is that, here's my story, here's what God's done for me, but learn from me, and don't fall into the same grievous sorts of sins that I did. And then we can talk about what those types of sins are throughout the rest of book 2 here. But so it's helpful because it's positively framed. It's not just this awful negative critique of himself all the time. He's saying something more positive, what God has done, and he's giving us the reason for what he's written the book for.
Yeah, and I mean, this whole section is fascinating. I do like that he gives confession because you have forgiven me. And so, but maybe that's just one. I don't know if we actually talked about this yet, but confessions, I think we think of that like, these are my confessions, like we're confessing our sins or whatever.
No. Yeah,
and that's
has
partly
a
true in Augustine. He confesses his sins,
sure,
but
sure.
also confessing praise.
Yep.
And confessing what's true. It's like, when you confess a creed or something like that.
Yep.
No,
so that's definitely a part of it.
It's a bigger picture than we might think about just because of the English word today. Actually, I would even say the paragraph before you read, so that would be the end of section 6, is really fascinating to me, and it begins, I guess, with an allusion to Psalm 72. So let me read that paragraph because I think that might actually help us to like set the conversation.
Sure.
He says, "So the soul fornicates when it is turned away from you and seeks outside you the pure and clear intentions which are not to be found except by returning to you." Now, return is the word for repentance, right?
Yeah.
"In their perverted way, all humanity imitates you." So everybody imitates God. I mean, you're created in his image, but in a perverted way. "Yet they put themselves at a distance from you and exalt themselves against you. But even by thus imitating you, they acknowledge that you are the creator of all nature, and so can see that there's no place where one can entirely escape you." Which probably is alluding to one of the Psalms as well.
Yeah, probably one Psalm 139 or something.
Yeah, I can't remember it's later on, but I can't remember the number offhand. "Therefore, in that act of theft, what was the object of my love, and in what way did I viciously and perversely imitate my Lord?" So again, imitate's been mentioned 3 times. Viciously is from vice, right?
Vice, yeah.
"Was my pleasure to break your law, but by deceit, since I had not the power to do that by force. Was I acting like a prisoner with restricted liberty, who does without punishment what is not permitted, thereby making an assertion of possessing a dim resemblance to omnipotence? Here is a runaway slave fleeing his master and pursuing a shadow. What rottenness, what monstrous life, and what an abyss of death! Was it possible to take pleasure in what was illicit for no other reason than that it was not allowed?" It's a really key question at the end, but this whole section kind of sets up why he's so thankful for forgiveness, because what he's saying is, look, because we're created in God's image, we imitate God, but because we're sinners, we do it in a perverse or vicious way. And so even people who deny God they still have to imitate God because they're created in his image. It's like they can't, even if they deny it, it's true. But what that means is you pursue everything like God might for a good end, but you ruin that good end. And so he finds at the very end what makes it so sinful for him to have stolen a pear, and that's the context too. A lot of this chapter is about him stealing a pear with some pears. He thinks it's so monstrous because he actually took pleasure in the evil itself. And so a lot of us, whenever we do something, like we might pursue a good end, but we do a lot of evil on the way. So I might want to be a good parent, but I might unrighteously discipline my child because I get too angry with them, right? Like, so it's good that I wanted to, but I'm full of sin, and so it's vicious. Or I might like, you can mention anything. Like he'll get to talking about Adam and Eve later in this book, and how Adam listened to his wife because he loved her, which is good, but he actually misordered his love because loving God is greater. And so he wanted to do a good thing to love his wife and accepted the fruit from her, but it was actually sinful. It was vicious.
Yeah.
And so I actually think here what he's going to talk about, what makes the sin so evil, of he and his friends stealing some pears is in part because they didn't really do it for any good reason.
Yeah.
They did it because they love the pleasure of doing evil, which is like the worst thing possible. That's like what like the worst type of sin possible could be. There's no good in it. It's pure evil. Now, there's a caveat because at the end he says it was probably because I wanted to for friendship's sake. Yeah. So he's going to say it's impossible not to do like evil is not a subsisting thing. We'll learn later in this book. So it's impossible to do evil by itself. It's always a misalignment, a misfire, or a privation of the good. It's like you're trying to do something good, but you do something terrible. So you want to give someone a deal. So you sell them a car and you want to give them a good deal. And so that you take $10,000 from them, but you list as 5,000 to cheat the government, right?
Yeah.
Of their taxes. Well, you're trying to do a good thing to the person who bought your car, but really it's also evil at the same time. So yeah. I think that's what sin, I mean, he's going to discover that's what sin is, especially after he flirts with Manichaeism, which we'll get into later. So yeah, I think that's key.
No, I mean, everything you're saying there, it's like, that's replete right through book 2, you know, like think about like the image, all the various imageries that he's going to use to make exactly that point. So you have like, he gets into a relationship that's grounded in lust, which is a perversion of love, right? So note, even his parents are sort of like complicit in this, because Monica doesn't want him to marry at this point because of ambition. So, you know, she's part of it. The dad with that whole Roman bath scene is really weird too. So you've got him perverting love with lust. So the telos of love is being perverted. That's, you know, perversion actually means knocking something off of that telos. Or that
clarify perversion, because I think most of us think of it today as like an insult, but it's
you
more
think,
of a description.
You pervert, right? That word comes from somewhere that had more of a technical meaning, and that was the idea that like everything is working towards that telos, that end point. It's kind of like Aristotle's final cause, right? And a perversion is something that actually knocks it off that course.
You're knocked off course.
Yeah. So this gets into his whole issue of like disordered loves, because you should be, and he even talks about this in here, right? You're oriented towards the good, which is God. And the more you're oriented towards him, this is where he's going to get into the whole like multiplicity versus unity kind of stuff. But the more you're rightly ordered towards him, then the more, you know, you're going to have those desires actually manifest themselves with good things. Right. So the love thing, nope. Then he's got the pairs, right, which is a pretty interesting illustration. Both of these, the marriage imagery, love, and then the pair imagery, both have garden implications, right? Like there's marriage in the garden, Adam and Eve. Now you get this like he's under a tree, like kind of thing, you know, eating a forbidden fruit. And here the idea is like he should be eating the fruit for its benefits, for its pleasure and enjoyment and things like that. Instead, these guys just take the fruit. He's like, I already had it. I had fruit at home. I had pears at home. I didn't need these. And they just take them. They throw them away and run off and laugh. And that's not the intended end for what they were supposed to do with that tree. It wasn't its purpose. So that was perverted. Ambition is the other big one. And so ambitions here. He's got all these ambitions. But they're not for anything other than, I mean, I can't remember where he says it, but he talks about his parents' ambitions for him that were totally.
Well, his dad was basically for rhetoric alone, and he didn't care about his character. Augustine complains. Yeah,
it's right here under number 3, at the end of number 3. Both my parents were unduly eager for me to learn. My father, because he gave me next to no thought. He said, gave next to no thought to you and only shallow thought to me. And my mother, because she thought that the usual course of study would certainly not hinder me, but would even help me in my approach to you. So she thinks that study is going to get him to God.
A good grade, son.
Yeah, to the best of my memory. Interesting. There's language of memory again. He's actually talking about, you know, do I remember this right? This is how I construe the characters of my parents. Furthermore, I was given a free rein to amuse myself beyond the strict limits of disciplines, that I lost myself in many kinds of evil ways. So here, discipline that gives you the order that's going to direct you towards the good. Even his parents aren't doing it, right? And so and then he says, what malice proceeded from my pampered heart?
Right.
And it's like, oh, so you're just seeing everything you're saying there. It's just in all these various tangible images that are so like common to humanity. Like these aren't like, it's not weird. Like our parents do this stuff to us all the time. They indulge us when they shouldn't.
He's very ordinary. He's using some profound ideas with very ordinary illustrations. Like you can tell he's a preacher, basically. think at this point he was at
or he's
elder,
a
right?
rhetorician. Yeah,
Rhetorician.
Yeah,
Okay.
he is at this point. This is 6 years after his conversion, I think.
Okay.
So yeah, he's in.
Yeah, he's
Hippo
going to
at this
be
point.
in. Okay. Yeah, and maybe just stepping back too, to kind of summarize some things you said. Like the book 1 of Confessions opens, "You have made us for yourself, and we can't find our rest until we find rest in you." So there's a sense in which, as you said, our telos, or our purpose, is to return to God. And so our end is like the beginning. We come from God, and because we've come from God, that already gives us our destiny, or telos, or purpose.
Yep.
And that's basically to be fulfilled by God.
Yep.
And so we're all turning back to him, and you could call God the good. And by that, all you mean is it's the best decision possible is to follow whatever God is.
Highest, most perfect being.
Yeah. It's just kind of more technical language from his day to say it's like the best choice ever. I mean, following God's the greatest thing you can do.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, everyone does that. And we're all, even if we don't know it, we're meant to do that. So you live, but because you're ignorant and because you're sinful, you don't always know how to do that. And so you either vitiate, which is to private, like is to not fully do what is good, or you pervert, which is to go off course. So I mean, the old kind of cheesy illustration is you have like a bow and arrow and you're trying to shoot the arrow at a target and you miss the mark.
That's not cheesy. That's actually that's in Aquinas's Fifth Way, I think. Is he the one that uses it? Yeah, because he's pulling off of Aristotle's.
Okay.
Well,
it's part of the etymology of the word for sin as well. But
yeah.
But I guess the point is like that's kind of a perversion if the wind hits and moves it away. And privation would be like you just kind of like drop the arrow and let the string go.
That's right. Yeah.
And so these are ways to describe sin, and they're not anti-Bible, but they're just trying to show you what the Bible's actually describing. Just like the word Trinity is to say, like, when you read the Bible, you see that the Father, Son, and Spirit share the definition of God. Maybe a good term to use to describe that reality is Trinity. And so for this too, it's not saying anything anti-Bible, but rather it's just using words to describe the Bible.
Yeah,
I think it's quite helpful. I mean, for us. Now,
the technical, sorry, just to jump into this for what you said a second ago, like the idea of like everything has its source in God, it kind of comes out, and then the telos is that's going to be the return. That's like the technical language for that is the Exodus at Reditus, which is actually how Aquinas organizes the Summa, I think. He's drawing, I mean, Augustine's doing exactly this. And
I think
Augustine,
all Christian theology, maybe until recent times.
But it's also not a whole lot unlike Plotinus's understanding of like the emanation from the one that will all eventually return back to it, right? So you can see that all in there, which I think you also see in the Psalms. And it's like Aquinas is pulling from Augustine as well as Pseudo-Dionysius. So I mean, it's just like
the Bible begins in a garden and ends in a garden. It's the story of the Bible.
And that's again back to like the garden with the pears, and then garden in Milan.
The conversion is also that's your good. And I would just say, like, you could look at this and say, well, Plotinus has this idea of procession returning to the one.
Yeah.
And so Augustine maybe just adopts that, and it's kind of pagan.
It's not that simple.
The alternative, or alternative, not the alternative, but is to say, actually, what Plotinus is doing is he's human. And so he has these instincts that are right, but he's ignorant and sinful. So he knows, just given the way the world is, we must have come from something that is like God, and we must need to return to it. He doesn't know who God is. He doesn't know Yahweh. He doesn't know Jesus Christ. Well, I guess he knows the names, but he doesn't know that, he doesn't believe in them, as far as I know. But because he's human and because God made us for himself, he's able to create these categories. And I mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, Romans 1 makes this whole point that from what God has made, anyone can infer back that God exists in his invisible power and divine attributes. You just don't know who that God is unless a preacher, Romans 10, preaches the saving gospel. So apart from that, there's no way to know God or to be saved without hearing the word preached in some form.
It's funny because, like, I mean, we dealt with this when we were looking at the beginning of the Institutes with Calvin, like a year and a half ago. And I've been looking at it again with my students in historical theology here at CCU. And it's like, as I was reading all this stuff in Augustine, and then I'm rereading the opening chapters of the Institutes, I'm like, oh, he's saying exactly the same thing. And like, the idea of like, the created things are beautiful, and that beauty is a mirror that shows us God, and that there's like this transcendent reality, the theater of God's glory that's like mediated through these things that are beautiful, such that we can know him. And Calvin's making constant appeal to Hebrews 11:3 on that, But here you're seeing it in Calvin, or sorry, in Augustine. I mean, even like on number 5 here, where he talks about ambition in that opening paragraph, kind of halfway through. Then he says, the life we live on earth has its own attractions as well, because it has a certain beauty of its own harmony with
Yeah.
all the rest of this world's beauty. And that's how the ancients defined beauty. It was that which was harmonized or harmonious, which when he starts to talk about the unity of this, we're either in multiplicity or we're in unity. Multiplicity or division is where the chaos and disorder can come within material things. But we want to go back to that which is fundamentally unified, the simplicity of God, divine simplicity, where there is true beauty, where there is the true harmony. That's why God is the good. And so then he says, friendship among men, too, is a delightful bond, uniting many souls in one, because that's what friendship does. And that's very Aristotelian and Platonic and all that stuff. All these things and their like can be occasions of sin, because good though they are of the lowest order of the good. And if we are too much tempted by them, we abandon those higher and better things, your truth, your law, and you yourself, O Lord our God. For these earthly things too can give joy, though not such joy as my God, who made them all, can give. Because, and here's a quote from Psalm 63, honest men will rejoice in the Lord, upright hearts will not boast in vain.
Yeah. And I think one thing I just say too, just to add to what you said about beauty, is that so it is this unity, this and so on, and orderliness. But I think most of us, when we hear the word beauty today, we're so locked into the idea of like an Instagram model or just like some physical thing like that. And while that might be included in the sense of just like this general concept, beauty is like David says in Psalm 27. That he longs to gaze at the beauty of the Lord in his temple. And beauty is ultimately something that attracts you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good. So in God's ordering, beauty is good. So God is beautiful, not just because he's rightly ordered in all these ways or has ordered creation, but because beauty or goodness is itself attractive. It's always better than its alternative. I mean, that's why I think in this chapter, if I remember, Augustine argues basically that, or implies, good is always better. It's always stronger than evil, because evil is merely a privation. So
yeah.
beauty is this attraction towards God.
But it's not just attraction, right? It's actually it's like attraction to like participation, and you
Right.
want to you want to join into that unity, right?
It's
like
good.
That's
not
what
just
that's marriage, right? It's like here you are, you're two distinct beings, you're a multiplicity, and yet you unite together in an actual covenantal but also a physical bond through sex. It's like that, like sort of get kind of creepy on you, but it's like when you're kissing that other, your spouse's face. It's because you're like, there's like this like trying to like, it's like when you see a baby, you're like, oh, it's so cute, I just want to eat it. It's like that same like that weird kind of like, it's like you want to participate in the beauty of it all, and that's like that unity. But the great thing is that what Plotinus loses, that Augustine in De Trinitate is going to like, I think, really expand upon, is that Plotinus only has unity. That's why you've got to get rid of the physical world. Augustine's going to affirm, no, these are goods. They just have to be put in the right order. Yes, we can move from the spatio-temporal up to the eternal, but the spatio-temporal is still it's still a good thing because God created it as good. Plotinus has only got like the unity. But thank you, doctrine of the Trinity, right? That you can actually have that unity that actually has within it, speaking carefully, of course, the three persons that are the hypostases that subsist in the one simple substance. There's still a place for a kind of multiplicity, right? That's not ultimately bad.
all right, Cornelius Van Til.
Yeah, or Rush Judy, the one in the many.
So let me read to you from the very first paragraph, 2 sentences.
Yeah.
The bottom of the first paragraph. Augustine says, "You gathered me together from the state of disintegration in which I had been fruitlessly divided. I turned from unity in you to be lost in multiplicity." Now, that's saying what you're saying, but I think that maybe another way to put it, maybe to illustrate, is like, all of us know that the older you get, the more choices you have in life. And there's 1,000 ways you can accomplish something, 1,000 things you're accountable to. Usually you can't do them all. And if you think you can, you get overwhelmed, because life is by definition overwhelming because there's so much choice. Whether that's 1,000 emails a day or text, like everything you see is choice. And a lot of people have found that this creates stress and anxiety. So the minimalist movement, for example, would be an expression of trying to counter that. So I think actually Augustine is saying something true theologically that is in our own experience so obvious. And that's true freedom isn't like having the choice to do anything whatsoever. That's just expressive individualism. That's actually the abolition of yourself. But true freedom is knowing exactly what to do and having a simple, unified set of choice because you know the right thing to do. It's relaxing. It gives you rest. You know exactly what to do. It's returning to God and reordering your entire life, your all your affections, all of your desires, your will, your intellect, and placing it on the most ultimate end, which is God. And then you reorder everything around that. And you can love what Augustine calls the lower things, like the things around you, even a pear, for example, because it's ordered rightly. It's not taking a priority. So the simple example is, again, Adam could have loved his wife Eve and God at the same time by not taking the fruit from her and saying, hey, you shouldn't do that. But he loved her more than God in that choice and disordered his love, and that's sin. And that's wrong.
Yeah, even in the translation that you have with Chadwick there, he actually talks about, again, fruitfulness of something, right? Which again is that light, it's purpose, but it's also
the fruit was beautiful.
Yeah,
it was not that which my miserable soul coveted.
Yeah, and he talks about that body and soul relationship here, and it's like the soul is what is like his problem. And because the philosophers, right, like if you read like the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, who's a Stoic, and it's like, you know, you can through like your own self-control do these right things. You can live you know, well for your family, for your society, as he is an emperor and all that kind of stuff, and you just do that by chastening your own body. And Augustine's like, no, you can't. That's the whole point. It's like, no. So as much as he's going to pull from ancient philosophy and Bennett, it's like here he's standing straight in the face of it all. It's like, no, because this is actually a problem that's within inside me. And it's like, is the external things that I'm doing are just a manifestation of this evil. This is why he's saying in that section that I read, he's like, even the things like you kept me from doing, I would have done anyway. You kept me from doing it. The problem's actually here. It's the evil that is actually within me. And that's why he's also using all that garden language here, because this is the sin that he's going to explain later in the Pelagian controversy. This is the sin nature that I've actually inherited. And I'm not living the good life, right, merely by the externals and the self-discipline and all that kind of stuff, because that's only going to get me as far as the God of the philosophers. But I actually want the God who is the true God, the God of the Bible, the God of our actual reality.
Do you think in your Pine Coffin edition, you could read 10:27? It's I think your Pine Coffin does it better. I think it's my favorite.
Okay, hold on.
Just that first paragraph there. I think that is like a cool summary of what we've been talking about in certain, or at least there's a connection.
Book 10:27.
Book 10, yeah, section 27. That first paragraph.
Oh, okay, sure, yeah. Oh, yeah. Here we go. I have learnt to love you late, beauty at once so ancient and so new. I have learnt to love you late. You were within me, and I was in the world outside myself. I searched for you outside myself, and disfigured as I was, I fell upon the lovely things of your creation. You were with me, but I was not with you. The beautiful things of this world kept me far from you, and yet, if they had not been in you, they would have had no being at all. You called me. You cried aloud to me. You broke my barrier of deafness. You shone upon me. Your radiance enveloped me. You put my blindness to flight. You shed your fragrance about me. I drew breath, and now I gasp for your sweet odor. I tasted you, and now I hunger and thirst for you. You touched me, and I'm inflamed with love for your peace. I quote that in my philosophy classes every year. It's such an awesome quote.
Actually, I like the way he says it in actually Chadwick, the beginning part better. Late have I loved you, beauty so old and new.
Oh,
late have I loved you.
That's so Shakespearean, you know.
Yeah. You see so much, and by the way, that these created things are good because they participate in God as effects from cause. In that
right. There's Aristotle again. It's like every effect has the vestiges of the cause within it.
Yeah.
Right. Like you see, that's why, man, we just before we recorded, your boy was just there on your lap, and I'm like, good grief, those Graham genetics are strong, because you're the cause. You're a secondary cause, but nevertheless, you're the cause. He's the effect, and look at him. He looks just like you.
Yeah, that's it.
Can I just read to just back to the unity thing, because he is really drawing from Plotinus here on unity, and I want to actually read the quote, or at least a reference from the Plotinus's Aeneads, where he talks about unity here. And so I'm just going to quote it. So the soul, this is Plotinus, even if it is a unity and lacks distinct parts, is manifold. It contains many capacities within itself, reasoning, yearning, apprehension. All these co-inhere in a unity as if in chained together. So the soul supplies unity and is itself a unity. So here he's talking about like fundamental to who we are as the soul, and the soul itself is a unity, which is then it's a good. Now, Plotinus is not going to always be helpful when it comes to what the nature of the soul is, theologically speaking, in terms of the Bible. But nevertheless, you can see that, like, okay, yeah, he's very much in favor of like this notion of unity, that you can have even disparate things come together in a unity to form something that has a purpose and a good. Whew!
There's a lot there, but I think at the end of the day, for Augustine, this chapter is, we should love God. We're created to love God. Everyone imitates him badly or goodly, but my sin was so bad with this pear example, because much of what I did was simply to enjoy the pleasure of sin, albeit at the end of the day, I did it for the sake of friendship. That was the good I pursued, and perverted it and corrupted it.
And friendship is going to be like this pervasive theme now, right? Because he's gonna, there's the thrashers that are his friends that are, you know, I love friends. That's one of the translations for the.
Oh, interesting.
I think in one he calls
like a
them
1980s. Like...
Yeah, I always say that in my class too. Like he sounds like one of those like 80s gangs from New York City or something. Thrashers. So he's with those guys. He calls them ruffians. They're his friends. But then he's going to get to like, he's going to go from that kind of just like uninformed view of friendship, getting in, you know, falling in with bad company. He's going to move then to a Platonic idea of friendship later when he's talking about the friend that dies, right? And that's the one where he's like, you know, the language there, he's using all this Platonic language of friendship, and it's so beautiful. And you're like, wow, this is what friendship could be. And then he's like, and none of it was in Jesus. So it's not actually real friendship. And you're like, whoa, like he totally dupes you with like the beauty of the rhetoric of what this friendship looks like. And then it's like, oh no, true friendship actually has to be in Christ. And then who becomes the models? It's going to be Alypius, his friend who's with him right the way through.
And I think the grieving between that friend and then Monica after his baptism is like, I think a really huge key, because he doesn't grieve like the pagans do when she dies.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
He probably naturally grieves, but it's much different.
Yeah.
So.
And like even like the concubine that he's with, she's a companion, but she doesn't prove to be the right kind of friendship. Like true friendship is in God, and that's where like he's with a group of friends in the Garden of Milan when he gets saved. You know what I mean? And like then immediately he goes off into a community in Cassiquiacum. Then he's off back home to Tagaste, and that's where Alypius then stays to become a bishop. Then he's like back in Hippo setting up a monastic community with all his friends. And it's just like, bang, like friendship, true biblical friendship then really becomes a defining factor for him.
So I think next week he jumps into Hortensius, Cicero, and
Carthage,
begins to flirt with Manichaeism. That'll be, maybe that doesn't sound that fun, but it's his intro into philosophy and the problem of evil. So why do bad things happen to good people, and eating spirit fruit and all that kind of fun stuff.
Belching. He uses the language of belching when he's talking about like basically like him like uncontrollably ejaculating, right? And he calls it like, you know, the belching forth, and that clouds his vision is what he's talking about in book 2 and stuff like that. You're like, oh, that language.
I'm super glad that you brought that up at the end of our podcast, because it's a great and edifying way to finish. So see you next time.
He said it, not me.